All right. Well, once again, everyone, welcome to today's webinar, where we will present information on the SSL family grouping policy, which will discuss a more efficient product qualification process. Today, you have myself, Bernadette Boudreau, the Senior the Associate Director of Operations, and also my colleague, Aaron Feldman, a Senior Technical Operation Analyst, also at the DLC. We like to also give a shout out to our colleagues at DNR, Hybe Lou, Rachel Goff, and Dave Ryan, who assisted with the content development today and will also be moderating the Q&A panel. Once again, welcome to the webinar. The slides and the recorded webinar will be posted on the DLC website shortly after today's presentation so that you can have access to this information later on. We will remind you that all attendees are automatically muted. So please send any of your questions in the Q&A box. If you are experiencing any technical issues where you can't hear us or things of that nature, please use the chat feature to let us know. Once again, please place all the questions in the Q&A chat box, and our moderators will answer those during the meeting. Also, at the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session where we will address a set of questions to the entire audience. There'll be some questions where we feel that everyone will need to know the answer to, so we'll highlight those at the end of the presentation. The goal of today's webinar is to promote the understanding of the DLC family grouping policy. This will lead to a more effective and efficient qualification process of your products. In today's agenda, we'll go through what the family grouping policy is, why you should use the family grouping policy, what is allowed and what is not allowed in the policy, and how you can effectively use the policy. So let's get started. What is the DLC family grouping policy? Well, the family grouping policy is a pathway to qualify groups of products, related products to be specific. This reduces the testing burden and also lowers the per product application costs relative to testing and the listing of those products as far as your application fees. This family grouping policy is compared to submitting applications with single products, meaning one product. Generally, this policy is usable within product lines or groups of products that are built and marketed based on a common platform, where there are variations that exist on certain performance parameters that serve different needs of the multiple markets and customers that these products address. Now, why should you use the family grouping policy? As I stated in the previous slide, it does reduce testing burden and things of the testing burden and application costs. So let's look at an example. Let's think about a family of outdoor wall-mounted area luminaires that have two different CCTs, two different lumen packages, and two different optical options, which is a total of 6 products. Here's a breakout of that scenario where we've included model numbers, the lumen packages, rated efficacy, optic options, and the CCT options. So let's look at how we can apply the family grouping policy to this scenario and also look at the differences in charges when and testing when it relates to a single family application versus a family grouping application. So if you were to submit these products as single standard applications or single products, this could lead to 4 individual applications because single standard applications allow groupings of CCT. Yet, with these 4 individual applications, there will be 12 required tests. 8 LM79s, which would be related to your highest and lowest CCT, your lowest output, and your lowest efficacy products. There will also be 4 LM79 distribution reports for all of the distribution options that are available, and then 4 ISTMTs to prove your hottest or worst case temperature scenario. What this would lead to is 4 charges for a single application fee, or 4 charges of $750, leading to $3,000 in total application fees. Now let's look at that scenario if you were to submit it with the family grouping application. Within this scenario, all the variations that we've specified in this example, such as the different lumen packages, optics, and CCTs, would all be allowed to be grouped into one application. So instead of 4 applications, you would now have 1 application. Instead of the 12 required tests, you would now have 6 required tests. Within that family of products, you will have 3 LM79 color reports, which would represent your worst case light output, efficacy, and your high CCT product. Then you would have to have 2 LM79 distribution reports, represented for each of the optic options. Then you would have just 1 ISTMT report that would be the worst case of all of those products thermally. This would yield to a difference in application fees, where you would be charged for the 4 ITR reports, the color reports, and the ISTMT, and then you would be charged for 2 additional family members that would be added to the family, because we would have already made some of those products parents. Therefore, the additional family members would be charged an additional fee of $30. The total application fees would then yield to be $1,530. So as you can see, that saves almost half in fees. Not only does it save in the number of required tests that you have to do, but also in the fees that you would have to pay in order to get your products qualified and listed on the QPL. So we talked about the variations that were allowed in that specific example, as far as the CCT differences, lumen packages, and the optical differences. But what else is allowed by the family grouping policy? Well, before we get into that, let's start with the things that we know are not eligible within this policy. You cannot combine within a family grouping policy different LEDs. This does not mean different LEDs representative of the different CCTs, but we're meaning different LEDs from different manufacturers and also totally different LED packages. Generally, we categorize a different LED if the LED package cannot be represented by the same LM80. So those using different LM80 would need to be separated into separate groups or separate applications. Another variation that we do not allow is color tunable and non-color tunable products to be within the same application. However, note that different color ranges are also to be required in separate families as well. So if you have a set of color tunable products that is tunable to one range, and then a set that is tunable to another range, those must be included in separate families in order to be qualified. You also cannot combine DC powered and AC powered variants of a product within the same application. The DC version and the AC version would be required to be submitted under separate families. The other category that describes things that are not eligible within the family grouping policy are design differences that are not well understood on how they can affect the performance or make the products different by design and construction. So if there are differences in your design that are submitted in these applications, our reviewers will reach out to have a better understanding of some of those design differences and ensure that they understand if and how they affect any performance. The link below will take you to the family product grouping application information, where a lot of this same information is held. This slide deck will be available for you to get those links after the presentation. Now let's talk about allowed variations within the family grouping policy. Essentially, products with related construction that are intentionally designed, that have intentionally designed performance variations are allowed within the family grouping policy. Just like within the previous example, lumen packages, which may change the LED count and drive current, are allowed within the family grouping policy. Also, different variations in chromaticity and color rendering are also allowed within the family grouping policy. And once again, we know that there are going to be different drivers that may be associated with the different drive current changes of the products. So different driver variations are also allowed. That may mean different wattages and different inputs to those drivers. Now with optics, we do allow variations in optics. So things like lens style or different optical pathways, such as if you want a forward throw versus an area type lighting, those are different optic options are allowed. But please keep in mind that you will have to provide distribution reports on those different optic options. What we also allow to be included in the family grouping policy is those performance affecting those variations that do not affect any performance. Things like housing colors, mounting options, different control sensors, or different dimming protocols and options that will not affect the actual efficacy and lumen output of the product in a standard default option can be introduced into this family grouping policy. There are also differences in housing or heat sinking that, if well understood and documented within a construction of a product line, will be accepted. In the future slides, we'll go into more detail with some graphics and examples to explain how these differences in housing and heat sinking, as well as LED counts and some of these other variations, will allow you to group products. Now, we'll go into how we can effectively use the family grouping policy. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Aaron Feldman, and he'll take it from here. Aaron, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernadette. And thanks everyone for joining this presentation. Now that we know which variations can and cannot be included in a family, I'll go over how you can use this policy for your own product application. For the initial qualification of a family, qualifying the largest number of variations is generally the most time and cost-effective method long-term for qualifying products. As Bernadette showed in an earlier slide, the testing of family grouping applications is based on worst-case conditions, whether that's lowest light output, lowest efficacy, or the hottest configuration. When you qualify a larger number of products in an initial qualification, you're likely to capture those worst-case conditions. Where if you qualified a smaller subset of your product line initially, there's a chance that when you go back to add products in subsequent applications, that a new worst case variation is included, which would require additional testing. And if there are too many variations to qualify initially due to listing costs or other reasons that are not worthwhile to qualify all variations at one time, you should consider focusing the initial qualification on products that would produce the worst case configurations and the worst case conditions. And then subsequent applications can be submitted without additional testing if the new products are not representative of a worst case variation. So, you might think that it's great that in a new application you can combine products in the same family, but what about all the products that you already have qualified? Well, in update applications, you can combine products into a single family, even if they were originally submitted as separate applications or separate families, as long as they fit into the family grouping limitations that Bernadette mentioned in earlier slides. If you want any guidance on whether or not a grouping of products can be considered part of the same family, please email applications@designlights.org, and we'll have that email at the end of the presentation with some details, and we will review and get you any clarity to help process your applications quickly. You also may be aware that applications now must be submitted to version 5.1 of the SSL technical requirements. And there are details on the website within the 5.1 technical requirements page regarding the time frame for this transition and the delisting of previously qualified products that do not meet the 5.1 requirements. So we are available to assist you and to help you utilize this family grouping policy to help you upgrade as many of your products to 5.1 as possible. In these next few slides, I'll go through some common examples of product variations that can be submitted as a family. These slides are focused on housing variations, and while the slides focus on the different kind of housing constructions, all of the products must still meet the family grouping requirements that Bernadette went through in the earlier slides. So on this slide in the left box, you can see, I guess generally in these future slides with the different product types, there are going to be groupings of products that are boxed in red, and those groupings can be submitted in the same family. So here on the left, you can see that there are different end uses for these products. However, they have the same general housing shape, and they utilize the same LED modules. So you can see that there's a product for an area site, or a pedestrian for a sidewalk, or a floodlight for a higher light output, and also there's a wall-mounted variation. All of those products can be submitted in the same family. Similarly, on the right, you can see that there is the top product is mounted on a ceiling, where the center one is mounted on a pole. And then on the bottom image, the luminaire is mounted on a wall. These products all use the same platform and can be submitted in the same family. This slide shows some of the variations of housings that are acceptable to be included in one family. On the image on the left, you can see that the housings are generally the same. However, the end cap is a little bit different. And also in the bottom image, the two LED modules are contained within the kind of outer, thinner part of the luminaire, compared to the top image where the module closer to the pole is in the thicker area of the luminaire. Since these two products utilize the same platform and meet the other family grouping requirements, they can be combined into one family. On the images on the right, you can see that both housings have the same general shape. However, the top image is designed for a lower mounting height, and for lower lumen packages, while the bottom image is designed for higher mounting heights and higher lumen packages. You can see that there are 3 LED modules in the bottom versus 1 in the top. And since these product variations utilize a similar construction, they also meet the family grouping requirements and can be submitted in one family. The two examples here are representative of variations in shape that can be considered the same family. Within the left box, you can see that there are 4 different shapes for a post-top luminaire. There are differences in the top section where the LED module is housed. So if you look at the bottom left image, there's a curved shape for that top section, where in the rest of the images, it's a more sharper construction. There are also some differences in the height of this luminaire. So you can see the bottom right image is a bit taller than the other ones. And then lastly, in the top right image, the post-op luminaire is actually mounted on an arm coming through the top. These differences are allowed to be combined into one family. I will note that the criteria for combining products into a family doesn't negate certain testing requirements. For example, the requirement that each optical variation must be tested in a goniometer and submit a representative IES file. The images on the right show a grouping of wall packs where the housing shape changes for different styles, for a more rounded or more curved or a more utilitarian, sharper edged housing. However, you can see that the overall construction is generally the same with the LED module in the center. And because of that construction similarities between all of those product variations, they can be combined into one family as well. This slide here shows a few different cross sections of linear ambient luminaires and acceptable variations. In the left box, you can see that the top image has a lens and housing that's curved, where the bottom image, the housing and the lens is flat. But the general construction and the mechanism of light emitting from the luminaire is the same and can be considered part of the same family. In the center box, the luminaire has the same shape, but in the top image, the LEDs are pointed inwards, where in the bottom image, the LEDs are pointed down. Both luminaires emit light from the curved lens at the bottom of the luminaire and can be considered part of the same family. In the box on the right, somewhat similar to the outdoor products noted earlier, these products vary in size for both width and height. And additionally, there are differences in how deep the LEDs are seated within the luminaire. So you can see on the right image, the LED is that smaller square right in the center, is higher up in the luminaire, designed to give a perhaps a different distribution or a different cutoff angle for users in the space. And these construction differences, the size, and where the LED is located within the luminaire are acceptable differences to be part of the same family. And this last example here shows two different round high bay products, where the lens of one luminaire is round, but then the lens on the other luminaire is square. The general construction of the luminaires is the same, and they can be considered part of the same family. So with these examples that I just went through, I hope that you all can utilize them to examine your own product lines and to determine if your products can be submitted as one family to most time and cost effectively submit family grouping applications. So to summarize, the family grouping policy is a pathway that can be utilized to qualify groups or a group of related products to reduce the testing burden and the per product application cost. Generally, it is the most time efficient and cost effective method to qualify products. As Bernadette mentioned earlier, there are a few variations that are explicitly not allowed to be in the same family, such as using different LEDs, combining AC and DC products, or combining color tuning with non-colored tunable luminaires. Generally, if the differences between products cannot be easily characterized, or if there's some difficulty in understanding how the differences affect performance, they will need to be submitted in separate applications as separate families. Products with related constructions and intentionally designed performance variations can be considered part of the same family. And this policy can be used to submit new applications to combine product variations into one family, or to submit update applications where you can combine products into a family that were previously submitted separately. This task of reviewing your product lines and determining which can be considered in the same family may require an upfront evaluation and some planning. However, it can be used to save time by reducing testing and application processing, as well as reducing the application fees. So we hope that this quick presentation going through the family grouping policy, what is and isn't allowed, how to utilize it, and going through some examples shed some light on the SSL family grouping policy and how you can use it for your submissions. If you're unsure if products can be grouped into a family, please send us an email at this email address here to evaluate. And as we've been going through this presentation, our Q&A team has been fielding questions, and we'll go through some of them now. And if you have any additional questions, please enter them, and we'll address them now, or we'll reach out personally to respond.
All right. Thank you so much, Aaron. I'll give you some time to catch your breath and grab some water, and I'll field a couple of the questions. Okay. All right. Let's start with a question on one of the examples. I'm going to scroll back to the slide so that you guys can see. A question was asked of one of our attendees on, in the example, why doesn't the family not need a lowest CCT test? Well, in fact, the requirement for needing a lowest CCT test is still required. Yet, in this example, the lowest CCT test is also on the worst case efficacy and worst case light output product. Therefore, the requirement for lowest CCT, worst case efficacy, and worst case light output allow for one test to be utilized to meet those requirements and not incur an additional ITR charge. So in this specific example, that worked out. But however, in your family, you may have a different configuration that will yield to the lowest CCT, highest CCT, worst case efficacy, and worst case light output. And therefore, those would be separate tests that would be charged ITR fees for each of those tests. Okay. All right.
Another question came in for, if we qualify the worst case products in a family grouping application, can additional non-worst case products be added in later applications? Yeah, so this is something I was going through regarding the initial qualification and then subsequent applications. So once you qualify a family of products and they are listed on the QPL, you can submit an update application to add additional variations to that family, whether you didn't want to qualify those products initially, or if you have added variations to your family for different light outputs or color variations at a later date, then those can be included in an update application to update your family. Now, if there are no new worst case products, for example, if you're only adding products to your family that have a higher light output, higher efficacy, and are not worst case thermally, then they would just be charged the $30 per additional family member fee. Another question came in for what type of testing is required for different dimming variations? So testing for determination of whether or not a product meets the threshold requirements must always be done at the maximum power output, or basically a non-dimmed product. So in terms of specifically differences in dimming, there aren't any different testing requirements. However, if the differences in dimming are the result of a different driver, then you would have to look at your product variations and see if that additional driver results in a new worst case efficacy, for example, if the new driver has a lower efficiency. And thank you all for the great questions. We are reviewing them as they are coming in, and we'll speak to some of them as we keep getting them in the question pane. One question came in, which was specifically around DC products. However, if you have, this also applies for AC products, but the question was, if I have a DC fixture with 2 different drivers, is that one DC product with 2 different drivers, or is it 2 different products? So if there's if you have multiple products in if you have multiple drivers in a single product, they'll be evaluated, as a single product with a single configuration listed on the QPL, and you can qualify variations of those drivers in a family, dependent on the differences of those drivers. If they create a new worst case, you may have different testing requirements. Question came in from that regarding differences in LM80. So commonly, LM80 reports are reports based on performance of the LED component itself, and will be tested at a certain drive current and temperature. And in some cases, that drive current may not be sufficient for certain configurations within your product line. So there would be a separate LM80 report at a higher drive current. That's a scenario where where different LM80s may be applicable for submission within one family. However, if you have that scenario, please reach out to us to confirm, and we will evaluate to ensure that, in fact, those LEDs are relatable and can be submitted in the same application within the same family.